Was she fun to write for?
She was terrific because whatever you wrote, you knew it was going to be twice as good as what you wrote for her. She was, and she would do anything, absolutely anything. We heard that she played the sax once as a child, and we went to her and we said, you know, could you play Glowworm on the sax? And she thought, we said, give me 2 weeks. And she would go get a teacher and she'd learn to play the sax. She didn't mind if she looked ugly or dirty or, you know, she loved it. She really loved it, and she would do absolutely anything we asked. One time, I think it was the show where they were in Italy, and we wrote in that Lucy milks a cow, and we knew she'd do it, but we went down the set, and it was this really terrible-looking cow. It was kind of dirty and awful, and when you got up close, I thought, oh, well, she isn't going to want to do this. She looked at me and she said, you wrote it, you milk it. But she didn't make me. She didn't make me.
Did you have to try out the physical stunts in advance to make sure they would work before you put them in a script?
I always said, see, I was expendable, and she wasn't. We wanted to know if she would get hurt. That was one thing. And also we wanted to know if you did it, you'd find funnier things trying it out. And since we're talking about women in television, where I came in very handy because I was a woman, and we would see if I really physically had the strength to do it. So I really did try out most of them if the props are available. The one time I didn't try out where she stamped the grapes, and she said, I went down, she said, you have no idea. She said, it's like stamping on eyeballs. Oh. But she would do, absolutely, you never had to say, I wonder if she'll do it, I wonder if she'll mind. And
she'd risk anything.
And then Desi, who we would go down and say, we've got this great idea, and he would never say it's too expensive, or we can't do that. So we could let our imaginations just go crazy.
Did they drag their personal life onto the set? Did you know that they were a couple either at war or at peace on any given day's work?
Well, we'd sort of hear rumors. They had a house in Palm Springs, and people would say, they're not coming up from Palm Springs. Or they got to as far halfway and went back home, but they were very professional. And they fought, but they'd be making up by the time the scene was over.
It was the 50s. They had twin beds, right? What else couldn't you write about besides sex?
Oh, you couldn't say certain words. You couldn't say pregnant.
You honestly couldn't say
you
pregnant
honestly
on
couldn't
TV?
say pregnant, and so we would say, you know, Lucy is anciente, or Lucy is in a family way. They wouldn't let us say. They wouldn't let us
say in a family way with child.
Yeah, it was. It's incredible. Now, when we were doing Alice, they still had some censorship when I was producing that, and then they would let you say you could have three aggregate hells in a dam, and that was all. But in the Lucy days, you couldn't say anything like that, and they were very worried we were going to have this pregnant woman on the screen. This sounds archaic now.
Yes, it does.
But Desi had a rabbi and a priest and a minister who okayed all the scripts because we really didn't want to offend anybody. Because we were going to, do all the fun of pregnancy when she had the baby, and when we had all those wonderful things that happen to you where you can't get up out of the chair and, morning sickness and all those goodies.
How did you handle it when she finally did get pregnant? Was that a jolt, or was that something that she'd wanted to do for a long time?
Well, they were very thrilled. They'd wanted to have a baby for a long time, and so they were thrilled to death, but the show had just hit its big popularity, and so everyone was, what do we do now? Because as I say, now, all the women on television having babies all the time, and you just go along with it, and it's great. But then it was a big problem. So I think it was Jeff Oppenheimer, who was our head writer, producer. I worked with Bob Carroll, my partner, and I think it was either Jess or Desi who came up and said, why don't we do it on the show? Well, actually, it was great for writers, see, because it would give you all those shows. You
had at least the physical comedy of pregnancy and all of the changes.
And naming it, and is it going to be a boy or girl, and Fred and Ethel wanted if they were going to be aunts and uncles, and what were they, and all this stuff.
Did the delivery on the show, because I still remember that, Ricky trying to get her to the hospital, did that bear any relationship to reality when the baby was born?
No, not really.
He was calmer than that.
Well, because she had cesarean for some reason. See, so they knew, and they planned it. But the thing is, they did plan it on the night, since it was cesarean. She had the baby on the night we had the show. That the show was being aired.
Oh, my goodness.
So I was amazed. I can remember there were big headlines saying it's a boy. Headlines in the paper. It was amazing to me.
first primetime pregnancy.
Yeah.
When we come back, we'll meet some of your modern-day colleagues and talk with some of them live from the set of Designing Women in a moment. Primetime television writers, night writers as we call them. Now let's meet some of the other women writers of today.
You know, the truth is, you girls talk a good line about wanting a guy to be, you know, sweet and sensitive, but those are the guys you drive your cars over.
You know, what I don't understand is why they don't understand that we are talking about a matter of degrees here. Yes, we want a man to be sensitive and vulnerable, and we also want him to be strong and masculine. Women have integrated these qualities quite nicely. Why can't men do the same?
Yes, I mean, why do you have to be so extreme? I mean, there is just never a happy medium. It seems like most of you are either wimps or jackasses.
Talking to us via satellite from the set of Designing Women are Linda Bloodworth Tomason, who is executive producer and creator of one of television's top sitcoms, and roll tape.
If sex is bad, then why does it feel good? And love hurts, so why is it good? I don't know, maybe the answer is how you feel the morning after. If you feel guilty, then it was just sex. But if you feel guilty and happy, then it was love and sex. Either way, you're...
Oh, we had to flip that last word. Georgia Jeffries also joins us from the set of Designing Women. She is the supervising producer and writer for China Beach, an hour-long dramatic series on women nurses in Vietnam. Also joining us here in New York in the studio are Sherry Coben, who's the creator and writer for Kate and Allie, a sitcom about two divorced women with kids who decide to move in with each other. Let's take a look at her work.
May I take it that tonight was not some enchanted evening?
Sure, I got along without you before I met you, going to get along without you now.
That bad?
It was the worst date since Bonnie met Clyde. I don't even know that woman David was with tonight. She didn't breathe, she didn't eat, she just talked and shredded napkin after napkin.
Nervous people shred napkins.
Not cloth napkins.
Kim Hill has written many of television's top sitcoms, including Empty Nest, Cheers, and The Facts of Life. She recently co-developed a pilot of the hit movie Working Girl for television. We will take a peek at her work as well.
Okay, here we go. What? I like her, so you have to hate her. You cannot stand, not once, to agree with me, can you? That's ridiculous. I just don't like her. She is a top psychologist, intelligent, cultured, beautiful. What is it you don't like about her, Barbara? Her clutch purse? I don't know. It's just something.
Well, this is perfect. I've ruined my hair.
Here, put this on. Your hair looks great.
No, it doesn't. Look at this. Watch.
Did you all know each other before you were on this show, right? Have you all met?
No.
Some. No.
We met.
You've met?
I know
met?
Sherry. I know the most.
Well, how tough is the process of writing a script for a show? Because if someone performs it well and someone writes it well, it all looks like it was easy. Now, is it torture for you at the beginning of the process? Are you haunted by the blank page, or is somebody just so prolific it rolls right off? All of you.
That's not the hard part. The hard part is actually getting it to go on the air, which has nothing to do with any of the other things.
Really? It's fighting your way through
I don't have any idea what it is, because if I knew, I'd have something on the air now. Do you know?
So the writing for you is not the toughest part?
No, that's the fun part. That's why I do this. Because if that weren't the fun part, I wouldn't do this. There's too much rejection.
Linda, what about for you?
Well, I enjoy the writing very much. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so I'm having trouble hearing you, Jane. Can you ask me that question once more?
Uh-huh. Do you like the writing or the co-producing part better?
Oh, no contest between writing and producing. I really always say I'm a writer first. You know, being a producer, I guess I still have that kind of sleazy connotation from old Hollywood movies. And so I'm always much more thrilled to say I'm a writer. I think it's, you know, for me, it's the beginning and end of what I do. I mean, it all starts on the page, and it's what I like most.
Is writing torture for you, or is it quick and easy?
For me, Jane?
Yes.
It's pretty quick for me because I always say the scripts on our show are born of desperation every weekend. We've never been one script ahead on designing women. And consequently, I give my husband a heart attack every Saturday about noon when he clutches his heart and realizes I still haven't started the show yet. But I think that adrenaline going sort of helps the creative process, and I usually finish Sunday evening. And that's basically the script that we do every week. And the fact that we haven't been one script ahead doesn't give us a lot of time to potchkey around with it, and I think that helps.
You are also one of the rare people who writes all of the scripts for your show. Is that true?
Well, I did do that, and that was kind of a masochistic thing that I was doing. I don't know. You know, we don't get a lot of Emmys on this show, and so I thought, well, I'll be in the Guinness Book of Records. And that was really something that I, for some perverse reason, wanted to prove to myself, and I have done a lot of them, but I now have another person who's writing a lot of the shows in the form of a woman named Pamela Norris, and she's a Harvard girl who's Southern, and she's just wonderfully intelligent, has a very wicked sense of humor, so she's responsible for a lot of the wonderful designing women scripts you see this season.
Georgia, how about for you? Which part is the most difficult? Is writing easy, rewarding, torture, pleasure? What is it for you?
Oh, well, the writing's the joy, and the business is the torture. You deal with the business of Hollywood in order to get your words on the screen, but it's always exciting to sit down with a blank page. I don't think I've ever been scared by it. I get challenged by it, and I have anxiety attacks when I go through different drafts trying to get exactly the right word in the right moment. But I would agree that the tough part is getting your words on the screen in the way you want them, with the original idea that you had that spawned the story to begin with.
Where'd all your ideas come from? Real life, yourselves?
The yellow pages.
The yellow pages,
Everywhere.
that's right.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Linda, you look an awful lot like one of your characters. I've never seen your face before. So, you know, is this your life you're putting up there?
I suppose that, in a way, I'm a combination. You have to pardon me, because I am getting a little feedback on this, so I'm going to pull this out a little bit. I'm probably a combination of the four of them. They also each bring a great deal of themselves to the character. But
which one are you most like?
I always say that Suzanne is playing the part of me that I'm most ashamed of, which is the vain Southern woman side. And, you know, the side that's the most selfish. But I have to let that come out, because I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of her character.
Georgia, where do you get your ideas? Vietnam Nurses isn't exactly your usual brunch conversation.
Well, Vietnam is just another way of telling the human drama. And we do a lot of research on the show, no question. We have a Vets Day every season where we invite usually 20 to 25 women and men vets who come in and share their stories, which trigger ideas. But a lot of what we include in the show, a lot of what each of the writers talks about is based on some of our own ideas and experiences. One of the episodes I wrote this year was about a journalist, woman journalist who comes to Vietnam. And I used to be a magazine journalist. And a lot of her character and the discovery of having to walk through another experience and learn and emotionally identify with the characters was based on some of my experiences.
When we come back, I'd like to talk about some of these Hollywood terms that never get defined in a blunt way, like creative differences. I'd like to find out how these women would define creative differences when we come back. For prime time, and before we went to the break, I said I'd ask for a real definition of creative differences. Kim Hill, will you supply me with one?
Well, have you ever been on a bad date? It can be, it covers a wide gamut of things, and you usually have them almost inevitably, I would say, because you've got different people with different ideas. So,
have you ever had to leave a project you started because of them? Or leave a project at all?
I have been threatened to be pulled off a project that I started. Yes, that has happened.
Over what kinds of differences?
Well, basically about a character or a direction of the show, or...
What's that mean in reality? Can you give us a for instance?
A specific example. Say you're creating a character that you want to have a certain kind of personality, say an angry character, or a character with depth. And some people don't want that. They want something else. They want to see... something maybe that they see in their eyes that they don't understand in what you're trying to get across. It's very difficult to work with other people. In teams, I think it's just like a marriage, because you have to offer something to your partner that you don't have, or that they don't have, and vice versa.
Sheriff, have you ever ended up in an argument with men?
Have I ever not ended up in an argument with men?
Let me finish the question. About defining a woman character.
Absolutely.
Where you were arguing for something you thought was real and they had a conception of women that you just didn't share.
The most recent one, it's not quite that, but I just did a pilot script, which you'll never see, for the following reasons. There was a divorced family. Two divorced families live next to each other. I'm not stuck in this rut. This is not the only thing I write about, but I do come from a divorced home, and that is where I get a lot of my comedy. And these two divorced families are both headed by women, which is a novel concept since about, I guess, 90% of divorced homes are headed by women. But the networks have these ideas that I don't know where they get them. I've never read them. They say things like, men will watch men, women will watch men and women, but men will not watch women.
Yeah, that's interesting. They think that about our show, too.
Well, they see, I know. Anyway, they said, please change one of the women to men. I said, get one of your men writers to do that. I don't want to do that. That's not the reality that I see. That's not the reality that I care to portray. Men can do that one. That's not true.
Sometimes they don't seem to approach it from the character.
No.
Sherry's trying to do the
I'm trying to do a show that will work.
They want to impose their own fantasy on things.
Yeah, or just get ratings, which you can't do by following some idea of what people want to see. That's not true. I mean, the Mary Tyler Moore Show would never have gotten on had they listened to what they knew.
Linda, have you run into any of this with designing women?
No, on designing women, it's really been very exceptional. I think perhaps because CBS has a few holes in their ship right now, and they don't have a lot of time to bail out my boat. We're doing really well in the ratings, and I think we're delivering a show that they appreciate every week, and really from the get-go, we have just gotten enormous creative support, and I've been left alone. You know, it's kind of like the lunatics have taken over the asylum, and or your parents are away, and you've got this great babysitter. We've gotten to do almost everything we've wanted to do. I can't think of anything, in fact, that we haven't gotten to do. I will say, however, when I first started out in the business, you know, I had that sort of Southern girl mentality that it would be impolite to question the people I was working for, and I used to, before I had any clout as a producer or a writer, I used to always go home crying whenever I wrote a pilot, because they would always put me with two guys to supervise me. And it didn't matter if the guys were in comedy or what. They always brought them in, and then I would write the script, and they would be the producers. And it never failed. After the first draft, they brought in some writer named Irving who would rewrite them completely, and I would go home and cry and take my name off of it. And it didn't occur to me until about 10 years later that I actually, you know, had some control over the destiny of my scripts, and that I could actually fight for the content of them, and so I started doing that, and it made all the difference.
Now, I'm seeing a lot of nods when you tell the story. Is that a facial tick, or have you guys been through the same thing?
Well, I just want to say that CBS apparently has worn out the support for women on your show. Because I'll tell you, two shows back, I developed a show about 3 women who lived in New York and are nothing like the Designing Women for 900 reasons that I could tick off, which I've ticked off for the CBS executives, who have changed since then, so I'm not shooting myself in the foot, I hope. But they said, oh no, we already have a show about women. And I said, you have 900 shows about cops. You have 400 about private detectives. Why can't you have 2 shows about women? I don't understand. And they stuck with that. That's disturbing.
Madelyn, you date back further than most of these. Yeah. Did you run into this in the Lucy days, or was she so unique that they just didn't know what to do, except for not saying the word pregnant on TV?
Well, she was very unique. I also worked with Bob Carroll, so they didn't care if I was the woman. I ran into it earlier. I started out, I wanted to be a newspaper woman. And in those days, that was very difficult to break into. I couldn't get a job on a newspaper except on the so-called women's page. And then, but I couldn't even get one of those. So then I went into radio and then into television, because I had a whole different career, really, because I couldn't get a newspaper.
Go ahead.
You almost answered my question. I wanted to ask, when you were in television, you must have been the only woman for miles around except for performers. And I wondered how you broke in and what you had to do and how it was for you when there were so few women in the behind the scenes.
Well, I think I was about the only woman for miles around. Selma Diamond was writing in New York on a lot of big shows, and a writer named Lucille Callan was on the Sid Caesar show. But we were the only 3 at that time. I sort of went into television with Lucy, I think, and so, because I was writing a radio show for her, and she just took us into television with her.
So you didn't feel so alone?
So, no.
Let's talk about show business egos for a minute. How do you deal with those egos? Performers do tend to have them.
It's really hard. In my experience, in the beginning, when the show is just about to get on the air, the actors are very excited and they're thrilled to be there.
And very nice.
And very nice. They'll do anything. And then if the show is a hit, then you usually start to have problems.
Then they don't know your first name.
They think they're indispensable at that point, and sometimes they are.
Georgia?
Well, when you said let's talk about egos, I was going to ask if we had enough time, because it's something that you can talk about. It's not just the performers, although I would say they rate very high on the list, but you're also talking about network executives, you're talking about directors, you're talking about other producers that you work with. I haven't worked with anyone in this business who doesn't have a major sensitive ego, myself included. So when you're putting all those together, it's hard to find a consensus to get what you want, but you struggle through.
How difficult is it to negotiate your way through? If you're going to differ with somebody in your business, can it explode on you pretty quickly?
Yes.
That was quick.
Jane?
It can be messy, too.
Yeah.
It's really
I
interesting.
found something that helped.
Go ahead.
Linda, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You go ahead.
Madelyn.
No, I was just
going to make the point that it's really interesting about
Somebody please talk.
Talking about women writers in the business now. Something really interesting is happening in television. A number of network executives have been addressing it even this week. And that is that writers in television, it's more the director in features, but writers in television are becoming stars. And I think that gives the really creative ones a lot more power. And even though no one is indispensable, the people who are putting their stamps on their own shows, creating them and staying with them and putting their stamps on them, really do have the final say. And I don't think in the future it's going to be that a star is any more valuable than a writer. I also just want to say, if I can just take the time, that it is so thrilling to be on the show with Madelyn. And Georgia and I were talking before the broadcast, and our hat is off to her. I mean, without dating her, because I mean, making her look dated, I don't know her age, but she's absolutely a pioneer in the business.
Uh-oh, Madelyn,
and it's really an honor to be on the show with her. She covers even in what we're doing. You know, before the rewards were so great, and before women control that they have now. If I could, I would just put her on a float and let her ride around to all the studios, and we would all applaud her, all of us women out here.
Well, let's give her some applause too. We'll be right back. Go ahead.
I was wondering, Madelyn, you said that you started out in the photojournalism field. Did anyone else start out that way, or as an aspiring actress, or anything not related at all to that, to what you're doing now?
Oh, yeah. You have to start someplace. And
Yeah, you
Where did John start?
Yeah. I started doing sets and graphics in a Philadelphia local TV station, and wrote my guts out every night and produced my own children's musicals in New York. And I had a sheaf of paper this thick of scripts that I'd written, and was always giving them to anyone. I was fearless, and I was very young, and I'm very glad I did that, because I got my first writing job in television that way.
It's very smart to get a job in the business, because you get exposure. And when you just send your script in, a lot of people ask, you know, how do you sell a script? If you just send it in, these are usually to nameless people, you don't know them, and they aren't going to go to bat for you. If you work, you get exposure to all aspects of the business. That's how I started. I got my degree in school, and then I worked on a show called Soap, and I was a production secretary.
Oh, well, do we want to give her a round of applause?
I didn't write on the show. I got a job as a production secretary, which was interesting because I couldn't type, but that was my hardest.
Well, I guaranteed you didn't rot in the job.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead.
My question's for Madelyn. The romance between Diane and Sam on Cheers, why did that go on for such a long time?
Why did their romance go on for such a long time? As opposed to, you mean, just having them split?
As opposed to consummating, as opposed to breaking up?
I see.
It never really ended.
It's because it's generally believed by the networks, and they use numbers to back it up, that if a relationship is consummated, the public loses interest in the excitement of the relationship.
What does that say about American culture?
What does it say about marriage is what I think.
You know what it really says? That people who are in charge of things don't have lives enough to realize that once you've consummated, nothing else happens. You just go right to the fairy tale ending, happily ever after. There's no more plot. I'm married. I could do a sitcom about marriage very easily if anybody thought that was interesting.
This is a question for any and all of you. Can you write the stuff that you think is not real? I did some consulting work for a friend, and they wanted me to help with a character who thought Kenny G was soulful. I mean, I just hated this woman, and this fictional woman. And she was just dumb and naive and deliberately girlish, and I finally found myself walking in on the second day and saying, hey, ask me to write anything else. I cannot write words for this woman's mouth because I hate her.
It's hard.
If she's not real, you can't possibly know. I think everybody here writes the character first, and then the character does the talking. And if you don't define that person as a real person, they don't say anything. They don't
I don't know
talk.
how you write about somebody you don't
You have
like
to spend
either.
5 years of your life potentially with this person in your room alone, wrestling them in a typewriter. You've got to want to be with them.
Georgia, Linda, is it like carrying a small town in your head all the time?
I think we're always thinking about, and especially I am during the week because I don't start the script until the weekend. So, you know, I collect things during the week. I mean, the other day I saw a woman flossing her teeth in a restaurant, and I thought, well, how rude. And that was in the script Monday. I had, you know, Suzanne accosting her for that. As far as the credibility factor goes, I think it's really, really important to make, you know, not only the characters believable, but what we like to do on Designing Women is take a really bizarre situation and sell it and make the audience believe that it could really happen. Even, we did one show called Julia Gets Her Head Stuck in a Fence, and it was where Dixie had her head stuck in a banister the whole time. And I think Madelyn is really the queen of doing that because they did the most outrageous things on Lucy, and you always believed them, and that's why they were so funny.
But you have to believe them to write them.
Absolutely.
But I also think in any character you write, a bit of yourself comes out. Some characters more than others. And so, yeah, you're walking around with a small town in your head, and you're never, a writer's never on downtime. Anytime you read a paper, anytime. I was in the cleaners yesterday morning on the way to work, and this really interesting elderly man came over, started talking to me out of nowhere and discussing the pig valve he had in his body. And I thought, that's so interesting. I'm going to have to use that. So it just jumps out at you from everywhere, and you feel like a walking encyclopedia, and the only question is, do you have enough time to
Does
say
it make you a
everything
bit of a
you wanna
multiple
say?
personality, though, because you're writing for more than
no
one
question.
character, and if it's written well, it sounds like those characters thought of those things to say, which means it's a bunch of different brains.
Full personality, if you're really honest with yourself. I mean, don't you feel a lot of different ways about a lot of
I'm
things?
not sure I could sit in that many places in the circle, though, and carry the
Very
dialogue.
convenient. No one thinks you're crazy. No one takes you anywhere.
Madelyn,
They just pay you. It's great.
Were there parts of Lucy that were you?
I don't think so. People say that.
Is that
But we
honest,
did
or
use a lot of things from everyday life, as she says. And I think that's one reason people liked it, you know, where they sold their washing machine to the Mertzes. And when everybody sold something to a friend, and you know better, and it always breaks. I mean, and these are just ordinary little things that happen. And as you said, every time you're in a restaurant, you say, oh, we can use that. We once went out for pizza, and the man was in the window, you know, throwing the pizza up to get air in the dough.
I remember the
And of course,
episode.
Bob, Carol, and I looked at each other, and we got Lucy down there, and she went in the window and did the pizza and collected the crowd. I mean, that was just built in. It was, you know, you didn't have to write that. That was there.
This question is directed to Miss Meredith. Is it more difficult to become a woman writer now than it is back then, in Lucy days? Or is it,
Easier?
yes, is it easier? Or is it more easier, yes, one lady in the middle. Or is it more easier harder to become a writer without a college degree?
Well, I think it's easier to become a writer if you're a woman today. I think it helps if you have a college degree. I mean, that everything you learn, everything in your life helps you if you're a writer. And the more you learn and the more you know, the better writer you'll be. You'll have more experience.
Are the stakes higher these days? Are you guys rich?
Not rich enough.
But when we think you were rich?
That depends on how much you're earning, Jane.
Well, me and my baby boy are still sitting on the floor. Now, are you rich by comparison? I mean, is there a lot of money to be made in this kind of a business?
Definitely.
Oh, sure.
Yes, the money in television is excellent, and if, you know, if you get your own show and your own show stays on 5 or 6 years, you know, you're in great shape then for the rest of your life, which is a nice place to be because then you can really creatively do what you want.
Unless it's Kate and Allie, why?
Yeah. Well, because it was my first show and nobody thought it would get on, and it got on, and it went 5 years, and it's in syndication. I own this much.
Oh, God. On that note, we'll be back for a little more of the realities of being a primetime woman writer. Women primetime writers, go ahead.
Recently, there have been a lot of issue shows, like in Designing Women, when the woman got heavy and you justified the heaviness. Are there any issues that you do not handle ever, or conversely, are there any issues that you'd call your pet issues?
Good question.
Well, I love to do issues myself. I think there's a prejudice within the industry that perhaps a little sitcom shouldn't trouble itself to do issues, but I think if you entertain, then you really have a right to bring up things that are meaningful, and I think it makes the show a lot more interesting. I happen to come from a family of attorneys where, you know, if you didn't have an opinion, you got sent to your bedroom. So I grew up debating everything, and I really like that format. So we're accused sometimes of being preachy, but I think preachy is Southern, and it's an interesting way of speaking.
Is there anything you wouldn't do these days? Is there any issue you think still couldn't be brought up on television?
We've done AIDS, women in the ministry, breast cancer. We talk about homosexuality a lot. I think the abortion issue is the only really topical subject that we haven't done, and it's not because I'm afraid of it, but I haven't figured exactly a way that we could do it and have it be meaningful to all parties watching.
Georgia, how do you do the same thing for China Beach when it takes place during a time when people didn't talk so freely about these things? How do you impose the social issue without getting too dogmatic?
We have to do it in a much more subtle way. Also, the style of China Beach is much different from Cagney and Lacey. Cagney and Lacey, which I used to write and produce, was very issue-oriented, and it was very exciting to be able to deal with all the contemporary issues. China Beach, because it's set in 1968, obviously dealing with a point of history, so it makes it more difficult, but the style of the show as well. But there are two things we've just done recently, which I'm proud of, and I think we tackled them in an interesting way. We did deal with the issue of abortion, and that show is going to be airing the first week of February. And one of our characters does find herself pregnant in China Beach and has to make a choice about how to deal with it in a time when abortion was illegal. So I think that's very interesting. And we've also just in the process of producing right now a show in which McMurphy has to make a choice about a young man who's been injured in battle and is essentially mentally a vegetable, and whether or not she allows him to stay on extreme measures of life support. And that was a subject we wrestled a lot with the networks about because they didn't want her to make a moral choice about it. Even though we've shown doctors day in and day out making choices, they didn't want the female nurse to make a choice. Well, why not? A woman has that power, and she should be able to show it. And we've won that battle.
Go ahead.
This question is addressed to Madelyn. You said in the 50s you weren't able to say things such as pregnancy. Today you can say just about anything. How do you feel about that?
Do you think you had to be more expressive when it was more heavily censored?
I'm not sure about that. I think it depends. I think it's certainly good that you can say things today. If we just don't go too far, maybe. I think you have to, then it's up to you. It's up to good taste. So I think since there's not much censorship on television at all, I think you have to just use taste and don't go over the edge.
Do you think Lucy would work today? On the air, we're coming on the air for the first time?
I don't really know. I think, I've always thought funny is funny, you know, no matter when. And if something makes people laugh as much as that did, it might. I don't really know. How would I?
Jane, Lucy think Laverne and Shirley was sort of that updated a little?
Yeah.
I mean, physical comedy works when it's done well.
Lucy just returned from the grave was it Madelyn, was it a month ago?
That's right.
They ran an I Love Lucy on Monday night as the lead-in for Murphy Brown and Designing Women and all of the CBS shows, and I thought it was phenomenal that after all these years, Lucy could even come back from the grave, and she whipped everybody on every network.
Go ahead.
What gets you the most upset or frustrated? Is it the actors who don't interpret your writing the way you imagined it, or the directors who don't direct it the way you imagined it?
Or the executives who chop up the script?
All of the above.
It's before that ever gets to actors that's the most frustrating for me. Because it's when you hand in something and they say, we love it, it's so different than anything we've ever seen. Could you make it the same as this? Or could you make this man a woman? We love this, but this man should be gay and he should... It's just from space, and they never are right. I mean, well, they rarely improve something, let's put it that way. But they make lateral changes, and so you want to kill yourself.
This is why women become producers, or writers become producers, I should say.
Control your own work.
Sure.
But it requires complete, I mean, you have to have nothing else going on in your life.
Now, a couple of you are co-producing with your husbands. Identify yourselves, please. One, that's it. Does it help, Linda, that he's your husband? Does it help you know at least that one guy's in your corner?
It's just more than you can ever imagine. Yes, I really can't imagine it. I think I could do it without him, but I wouldn't want to. And there's that little Southern Belle side of me, too, that, you know, I'll admit, I let him take a lot of the dirty phone calls. And I'm ashamed of it, but, you know, you can only go so far with feminism. No, he's great. He's really, we complement each other because he does a lot of the things that I don't like, and I do a lot of things that he doesn't enjoy, so it works out great.
I could be wrong about this, but I think almost every woman who is a creator-writer has her husband as producer. I'm serious. Diane English does, Susan Harris does. I think the executives are very comfortable having a man to talk to who's related to the woman.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know. I talk to the executives every bit as much as Harry does, but there are certain things. I mean, he directs a lot of the shows. He also presents a different presence to the cast that's very, very strong, and mine is strong in a different way. But you know, I think it's really helpful. I mean, it's certainly possible to do it by yourself. It's certainly easier to do it with your husband.
Go ahead.
Feminism has gone through an evolution, and I wondered if any of you would like to comment on the evolution of your own feminism and how it has affected your writing.
Well, it certainly affected mine, because Kate and Allie was born out of the idea that I thought that the women's revolution was sort of stuck in working women and at-home women. So I wanted to put them in the same house and have them talk to each other. Because it seemed to me that once you did that, you had everything in common instead of nothing in common.
Georgia, can you answer that one?
I think that's a great question. I think I've become, although it may be not so fashionable any longer, I think I've become a stronger feminist with each year. And I think it's because the longer I'm in the working world and the more I wrestle with people whose opinions I don't trust as much as my own, the more power I want over my creative work. So that makes me feel that I have to empower myself on every level. And I want to show that in my characters' voices. So I had an interesting phone conversation the other day with a male producer who was telling me, you know, women aren't in fashion anymore. And you got to be careful about this, because if you associate yourselves only writing with female characters, writing about female characters, you'll be in trouble. And I think any good writer prides herself on creating male and female characters. And I hope women never go out of fashion, and that means that we have to make sure our audience is very responsive when we write characters that they identify with. I'd like to know what your audience wants to see in television in 1990, 1991.
Great, that's it. Kim?
It was my experience that when I was simply writing, I didn't have any problems. I didn't feel I was discriminated at all. And then when I was producing, when I moved into the executive area, I discovered there definitely is an old boys network, and I know what channel it's on. And you just have to be aware of that and work around it. I don't think it's impossible to work around it, but it does exist. And it's not something that's mean or organized or whatever. It's just that there are stereotypes, I think, that they do have in mind.
Go ahead.
You talked about the censorship issues in previous years. What's taboo now?
Low ratings.
Boy, have we gotten stressed. We'll be back in just a moment. More with the women writers. Women who write for prime time. Go ahead quickly, because we're almost out.
I'd like to know if you find it more difficult to write comedy than straight, serious.
Can't write straight.
Can't either.
Can't talk straight.
Can anybody write straight?
Georgia
No.
can.
I write straight, but I like to put some comedy in with the straight lines. I think that's important.
Tell me what it's like day to day. Is it really like Rosemarie and Maury Amsterdam and Ralph Petrie sitting around in a room making up jokes?
Buddy and Sally.
Yeah. Is it like that at all?
On a good it's not like that at all on our set, because we don't, you know, we don't do that. I mean, Pam and I, we've never had a meeting. We're really proud of that. Pam and I just adore each other, and I just write the script that I want to write each week, and the next week she'll write the one she wants to write, and so we don't have Buddy and Sally. But we do have camaraderie. We have fun with the cast. More fun some weeks than others. You know, it's not, comedy's really pretty serious. I mean, it's a business, and everybody's real serious about it, and it's not, I get the feeling that people think people in the television business are, you know, going to parties every night and having this, and actually it's sort of a 16-hour day, and, you know, it's not as hard work as working in a coal mine, but it's a heavy schedule.
Are you telling us it is not a laugh riot?
Not a laugh a minute. No, I don't think so. Do you?
No, but in our meetings, in our staff meetings, we tell a lot of jokes on each other, and I find they're almost like group therapy sessions, especially when you're writing about Vietnam, because you have to laugh at the most bizarre things, and if I told you some of the things we laughed at would probably be taken off the air. But it's the only way you keep your sanity when you're dealing with some of the subject matter we are.
Sometimes it's dangerous, too,
we have
because
our own entertainment behind closed doors.
Boy, that's it. We're out of time completely. Before we lose the satellite, I want to thank you very much for joining us from the set of Designing Women in California and here on the set in New York.
Thank you, Jim.
And congratulate you on your work. It wasn't easy to plow your way through the system, and we all think your work is pretty funny. And pretty serious. Great. Thanks.
Now this has the odor-absorbing power of this. New Stay Free. Now with odor-absorbing baking soda inside every pad. It's protection like nothing else.